a dark vaulted tunnel carved straight into the rock. They called it Dante's Gate. Whoever walked through it had no idea what waited on the other side. They only knew one thing: they were never coming back out. On the other side lay a tiny island off the coast of Crete, and the people who lived there, their own neighbors, gave them a name: the living dead. Here's the question that runs through this whole story. What kind of life or death really waited for the hundreds of people who crossed that tunnel of no return? Because the answer isn't the one you'd expect. What happened inside that island was far stranger than anything the people who feared it from the mainland ever told. The island is called Spinalonga. According to Venetian documents, the name comes from the Greek phrase stin elunda, meaning toward Elunda. The Venetians didn't understand it and reshaped it in their own tongue as spina, thorn, and longa, long. It sits in the Gulf of Elaunda, northeast of Crete, a tiny rock heavy with centuries. The Venetians turned it into a fortress with walls wrapped around every inch of stone. Then came the Ottomans. But what sealed its fate forever began at the start of the 20th century. You have to understand the terror of the time. Leprosy, Hansen's disease, had no cure. In the early 20th century, there was no treatment. The disease was met with horror, and lepers were made to carry bells to warn people they were coming. A diagnosis was a social death sentence. You stopped being a person. In Crete, many of the sick didn't even have a roof over their heads. Many lepers on the island lived in caves. On Spinalonga, at least, there was a hospital with nurses, a caretaker, and a priest. And here comes the decision that changed everything. The Cretan state, following the thinking of the era that demanded isolating the sick from the healthy population, decreed in 1903 the compulsory isolation of every leper in Crete on the island of Spinalonga. But there was a hidden motive behind that choice, and it wasn't only medical. The location was chosen because of the abandoned Ottoman houses, but also to drive out the Muslim population that still remained on the island. In other words, the island served two purposes at once: to lock away the sick and to conveniently clear a piece of land. The settlement began in 1903, and by October 1904, 251 people lived there, 148 men and 103 women. They crossed that tunnel, and behind them they left everything. Imagine being taken from your home and told to leave it all behind because you're never coming back. You're an outcast, your name struck from the official records of your town as if you had never existed. And this is where you'd expect absolute horror. But brace yourself, because what really happened inside is what nobody talked about. At first, yes, the horror was real. With Greece caught up in several wars and enormous economic hardship, in the early 20th century, the people of Spinalonga lived in wretched conditions. There wasn't enough clean water to drink or wash, and patients weren't allowed to grow their own food. Supplies came from people in the nearby villages who set up a daily market on the island. But the government allowance was rarely enough to cover both food and medicine. Rationed water, scarce food, the sick abandoned on a rock. That was the first chapter, and still the island didn't empty out. Quite the opposite. By 1933, 954 people were living on Spinalonga, almost 1,000 souls crammed onto a crag, an entire town of the condemned. But then someone arrived who changed everything, and this is the part that doesn't fit the legend of hell. In 1936, Epaminondas Remoundakis, a law student from Athens, arrived at the colony after being diagnosed with leprosy. He was 21 years old. His life, as far as the outside world was concerned, had just ended. He decided otherwise. Young and highly educated, Remoundakis founded the Brotherhood of the Sick of Spinalonga, which demanded better living conditions for the island's residents, including the right to run their own businesses. And what those living dead built defies everything you imagine about a leper colony. They painted the houses, set up a public cleaning service, and built a cinema and a theater. An electric generator lit the streets at night, and one patient donated a loudspeaker that played classical music through the streets. Classical music drifting through the streets of the island of the condemned. Think about it. Slowly, the patients began to live as normal a life as possible. They married and had children who grew into adulthood without ever catching the disease. There were schools, a cafe, and a barber. They had turned a sentence of exile into something like a living town, with its shops, its taverns, its churches. And in fact, the island became so woven into the local economy that something no one would have predicted happened. When it could finally be closed, there were people who didn't want it closed at all, because the cure arrived. Treatment for leprosy was discovered in 1948, and little by little the remaining residents of Spinalonga were treated and sent back to the mainland. For the first time in the island's history, walking out through that tunnel was no longer impossible. But the closure wasn't immediate, and here's one of the most uncomfortable details in the whole story. In 1955, a decree ended the regime of confinement and isolation of those carrying the disease. Yet the leper hospital of Spinalonga kept operating because it was vital to the economic survival of the entire neighboring province of Merambelo. Read that again. The colony stayed open, in part, because it fed the healthy people along the coast, and the sick, before they left, protested. The delay in carrying out these measures provoked fierce reactions from the patients, who launched a hunger strike in 1953. At last, the end came. Planning for the patients' departure began in 1956, and in 1957, the last of them, around 30 people, were transferred to the anti-leprosy station of the Hospital for Infectious Diseases in Agia Varvara, Athens, and the leper hospital of Spinalonga closed for good. When it closed in 1957, it was the last leper colony left in Europe. But the island didn't empty all at once. One person remained, just one. And his reason for staying is perhaps the most moving part of all. The last inhabitant, a priest, didn't leave the island until 1962 in order to keep the Greek Orthodox tradition of commemorating the dead at 40 days, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years after their death. A priest alone on an empty island for 5 years, lighting candles for the dead so that no one would die twice, first of the disease and then of being forgotten, because forgetting nearly won. After the colony officially closed in 1957, the Greek government destroyed all records relating to Spinalonga's history as a leper colony. The papers burned, the names erased, just as they had been erased the day those people crossed the tunnel, as if the island had tried, once more, to turn them into the living dead. So let's go back to the question we started with. What really waited on the other side of Dante's gate? The answer is that two things waited at once, and that's the chill of it. A condemnation waited, exile, the stigma, the name torn away, the rationed water, the certainty of never returning. But so did the opposite of everything the world believed. A community waited, people who married, had children, built cinemas and taverns, and set classical music playing between the Venetian walls. They called them the living dead. And maybe the real mystery of Spinalonga isn't how they died. It's how stubbornly alive they stayed, right to the end, in the one place the world allowed them to exist.